Fort Bragg, California, is a small beach town northwest of Sacramento. It is kind of a Stephen King feel to it. You know what I mean. That misty, almost eerie small harbor town, but it's beautiful and has a huge tourist attraction. You get people from all over the U.S. that travel here. My fiancé and I decided to drive up here after I had to take some time off of work due to stress. It was a last-minute decision, and we packed up our bags in less than 10 minutes, grabbed our dog, and took off. If we wouldn't have had our dog with us, I'm pretty sure I would have lost her. I guess that is where I tell the story, right? It's our second day here right now, and we are staying at a motel that overlooks the ocean. You can see the fog roll in during the early hours of the morning and watch the fishing boats leave the harbor to go get their haul for the day. It really is a beautiful thing to see. We woke up early, and I was craving, and I mean craving, eggs and bacon. After getting dressed and deciding what spot to stuff our faces at, we left for our morning adventure. See, here's where I made my mistake. I was driving down the road, and it looked like the stop we crawled up to was a four-way stop sign. I clearly guessed wrong because when I pulled out and cut off a small Ford Ranger with a dinky trailer attached to it and two old men driving, I realized a little too late that I had cut them off. They threw up their hands and pointed at me, but Lily didn't even notice it. I threw my hands up in a, sorry, I'm just an idiot tourist kind of way, and they just stared me down. It was a hillbilly standoff that George Strait would be proud of. I didn't think much of it and kept driving down the foggy two-lane road to get breakfast. I didn't even think to say anything to her about it. I never thought I'd see them again, and I didn't want her to complain about me not knowing how to drive. I was wrong, though. I was wrong, and I'll never forget what happened next. We got back to the motel after a not-so-great but overly expensive breakfast. We cuddled up and talked about our plans for the wedding, what we wanted to do after the wedding, and midway through our life plans, she realized that we were out of dog food and to feed Bruce. I agreed to going up to the cute but creepy market and grabbing a bag of goodies, kissed her on the cheek, and jumped in the Navi, we call her Navigator Navi, left and got about halfway to the store before I realized that I forgot my wallet on the nightstand. When I pulled back into the parking lot, I saw it. That same Ford Ranger with the janky trailer attached to it. The only difference was that Hank and Boomhauer weren't inside of it. I don't remember seeing them here last night, I thought. I walked up to our door while looking over my shoulder, wondering, what are the chances these idiots are staying here? And then, not 2 seconds later, my heart started beating faster. Our motel door was open, but barely cracked. It was open slightly to the point where you could see a sliver of light, but nothing more. I slowly pushed it open and looked inside, but I didn't see anything. Lily and Bruce were both gone. It was like they were never really there at all. My heart started racing, and I dropped my keys on the floor and ran outside, heart pounding in my chest faster than a jackhammer in New York. I didn't see the creepy old guys from the Ford truck or my fiancé outside. I was becoming angry and frantic by this point. Where are you guys? I kept thinking over and over, before the screaming in my head was cut off by the sound of familiar barking. I heard Bruce barking, and I ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my entire 28 years of life. I ran straight over to the front office where the sound was coming from, and that's when I saw her and our dog inside the office. She was crying, sitting on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, and his hair was standing straight up until we saw that it was me sprinting towards them. Lily got up and ran into my arms. Meanwhile, the clerk is on the phone, and I'm wondering, what just happened in the past 2 minutes I was gone? This is what happened, told by her, and it makes my blood run cold. It turns out as soon as I left, not 30 seconds went by, and those guys knocked on the door. Lily opened it up thinking it was me forgetting something, which I did, and they tried to force their way into the room, and one of them said, "You can thank your boy toy for what's coming to you," while grabbing her and covering her mouth. But those idiots didn't realize one thing, and that's that we had a dog in our back seat when I cut them off. Bruce jumped off the bed and didn't hesitate to bite the one grabbing her, then kicked him and tried to shake him off. But he wouldn't let go. After being bit and realizing that the noise would draw attention if they didn't leave, they ran off and Lily was able to run to the front office and wait for help, and Bruce followed suit. I wasn't there. I couldn't protect her. If we had found a dog sitter, she would be gone right now, but my dog was there, and he did exactly what a good boy, no, the best boy would do, and for that, he is truly my best friend. If he wasn't there, what would have happened? Would she have been kidnapped, beaten, or even worse? The craziest thing is that they haven't been caught yet. We filed all the reports with the local sheriff. I told them what happened earlier that morning, and the cop looked right at me and said, "You're lucky your dog was there. If he wasn't, and they got in there with her, you could have been filing a different report right now." I got tears in my eyes at that. I looked over at Lily and Bruce and thanked God that I rescued him from the pound, because in return, he rescued the love of my life when I couldn't. Moving from Michigan to North Carolina was a big change for all of us. The climate was a huge difference for us since we weren't as used to the cold, along with having to start a new school and meeting new people. However, there were other major differences as well. These ones weren't as innocent. When we came to Michigan, our parents bought a one-story house that had originally come with 2 bedrooms, but with having 3 girls, our parents remodeled and added another room. The neighborhood was a friendly one with lots of children our age to play around with. It seemed like we had hit the jackpot with this home. At the time, I was the youngest. When we moved, I was only 5. For the first 2 years of living there, things went great. Even with the 3rd bedroom, my sisters and I still liked to sleep in the same bedroom as we were all very close. Most nights, we would roughhouse around and watch TV until we were yelled at by our parents to go to bed. The night the incident happened, we were doing exactly that. It was late one night, and my sisters were on the bed roughhousing. That particular night, we were watching Ghost Hunters. I hadn't gotten up to use the bathroom. I'm not sure what caused me to look out the window, but I felt like something was watching me. As I turned my head to look out, fear froze me to my spot. It was like being in a nightmare and not being able to do anything as a face stared back at me was enough to send ice-cold shivers down my body and a knot to build up in my throat. I wasn't sure what to do. Did I call for my sisters and them call me crazy? What if the person behind the window tried breaking through? I was completely terrified as I looked into the man's face as he stared right back at me. He had no expression on his face, only blank eyes that would keep me awake for nights to come. With a sudden burst of courage, I managed to get out a meek whisper. "Guys, there's someone in the window." Of course, my first fear was correct, and my older sisters didn't believe me. They thought I was playing a joke on them as I kept an eye on the face, making sure it wouldn't disappear, but at the same time wishing it would. Finally, after convincing them to just look, they both got up and saw him. My eldest sister ran for our father as my sister and I both stood there in fright, unsure of what to do. My dad had woken up, and along with our trusty black lab and wolf mix Susie, he managed to chase the man away. Our dad called the cops, but they told us since they had not tried to break in or hurt us, they couldn't do anything about it. We started locking our doors after that. After this incident, we began to question the neighbors, and they all responded the same. The family with the fence around their property had an adult son who was mentally disabled who would go around the neighborhood and look into girls' windows. It had even gotten so bad with one of the neighbor girls that her father had made a bat with nails sticking out of it as a threat for what could happen if the man had tried to come back to his home. My parents took this seriously and proceeded to put inside locks and dark curtains on our windows so we couldn't see through. It seemed like the man had gotten the hint and we didn't have any more encounters. That is until one night my older sister, who was a younger teenager at the time, had just gotten out of the shower and was about to get dressed when she heard a noise at her window. She decided to stay in her towel and take a glance out the window to see what the noise was when she saw the man's face looking back at her. She screamed for my parents and immediately left her room. My dad was immediately up with a baseball bat and going after the man with Susie on his heels. My dad has let Susie go ahead of him with one marching order: get him. Being the loyal dog she was, Susie took off after the man and bit his ankle, taking him down. While this was happening, my mom was on the phone with the police who were on the way. With the help from Susie, our dad had captured the man and held him there until the cops showed up. They arrested him, but because of his disability, he was let go the following day. My parents were furious. They couldn't understand how the police could let someone off who had been caught multiple times trespassing into people's yards and looking into younger girls' windows. They, along with the other neighbors, set up a neighborhood watch. They made sure that us kids were watched 24/7 and that no harm would come to us. Something that should be known about my father is that he is an ex-Marine who developed PTSD, with one of the side effects being insomnia. My dad had taken advantage of this during these incidences, and he would keep watch of the house and constantly would check the yard for the man. This helped to make us feel safer because we knew with our dad watching over us, we'd be safe. It had barely been over a week since the man had looked into my sister's room when he came again. This time it was only my middle sister and I in our room. It was still early evening, and my parents and their friends were hanging out in the living room. We had an early bedtime because it was a school night, so we were both in bed about to fall asleep when we began to hear noises like someone was trying to get in. Fear immediately gripped both my sister and I, as we both knew what was most likely happening. Her being older and more brave, she jumped out of bed and ran to tell the adults what was happening. I, however, was once again frozen in fear as I could hear the man trying to force open our locked window. I could do nothing more than hide under my covers and hope that he couldn't get in. It wasn't long before the adults were in the room looking out the window. My mom came to comfort me, while my dad checked things out. Since it was winter outside, my dad sees the man's footprints below our window along with handprints on our window. His temper immediately flared as he told my mom to call the cops again. He decided to take matters into his own hands and walked over to the man's home. While there, he told the man's parents what their son had been doing and that the cops were already on their way. He made sure that the man was arrested and pressed charges. To this day, my sisters and I are still scared by what happened. We refuse to have any of the windows left uncovered and lock them, and always make sure the doors are locked as well. I'm not quite sure whatever happened to him after he was arrested, but there was never again a face in our window after that. Back in 2013, I was living with my ex at the time, who lived near a nice country village. And as I was in between jobs at the time, I picked up a job at a local garden center. It was casual retail work, fairly decent pay, and easygoing enough that I could take coffee breaks frequently and wear basically whatever I liked as long as I wore my work polo shirt. It was walking distance from my ex's house and full of people of all ages who were the most lovely people I'd ever met. Most of the regular customers who came to the garden center were usually sweet old people who would visit the cafe because we had free teas and discounted lunches for OAPs if they had a store card, so you often got to know all of them, and some of them were even given nicknames. Most of them sweet, like Pink Hair Lady, a cool 80-year-old grandma who wore a tasseled leather jacket and bright pink hair. Then there was a camper van couple who used to drive a really cool camper van with bright orange flowers painted on it. You get the idea. With creepy artist man, though, he gave most of the young girls weird vibes. He wore a straw hat, was in his late 40s, had round gold-rimmed glasses, and would wear strange graphic t-shirts with women on them and have some pretty odd slogans on the back. He always wore ripped jeans where his knees were always hanging out of them, which were always dirty with paint or mud or something. He had this weird half-smile that would never leave his face and kind of a leer that made people feel uncomfortable. He would take off his glasses and clean them constantly, which kind of made you feel like he was trying to get a better look at the girls who worked there, especially the younger ones. Anyway, It was a roasting hot summer's day, and I had gratefully accepted the job of watering the hanging baskets outside, where I could avoid the humid, sweaty heat of the greenhouses. I was wearing black shorts and my red polo and my tool belt to prune and deadhead plants as I went. With the hose in my hand and sunnies on my face, I was busy but enjoying the solitary job at the quietest part of the garden center. "Well, hello there." Out of practically nowhere, he slipped out behind some wooden trellises and looked me up and down, smiling with his weird, too small teeth. His eyes lingered on me for what felt like an uncomfortable few seconds, and I turned off my hose and asked him if he needed anything. He shook his head and kind of shrugged, still smirking at my legs. Okay, sir. Have a nice day. Let me know if you need anything." I turned to continue. "I have never seen you here before. You're a new one." "Huh? Me? Well, I've been here for 8 months now." "Oh, I must have missed the memo that a beauty like you started. You have a nice tan. You look young." Thanks. I'm 23. Anyways, I have to get back to work." "Well, nice to meet you, Cindy Butler." I suddenly remember my name badge and get slightly irritated that he now knew my full name. I make a beeline for the smoking area where the tool shed was with an excuse to grab some smaller gardening gloves, and by the time I returned to the floor, he had left. As the weeks went by, he would come into the store regularly, usually mid-afternoon, coincidentally, or so I thought, around the time I started my shift. Most of the time I was the only cashier, so I would have to serve him. He would buy the most smallest, pointless things like floristry wire or a tiny bag of birdseed. It seemed like he would purposely make a purchase with the intention of interacting with me. He would make comments about my appearance, statements mostly like, "You have your hair different today. Yesterday you had it down. You have new glasses." Or, "That's a different lip color to yesterday." He would always announce my name loudly and deliberately during every interaction. I felt uncomfortable, but I was 23 and just politely shrugged it off. Around Christmas time, I was decorating the artificial trees, and he cornered me in the forest of them at the back of the store. He jumped out from behind one and made me jump, to which I was kinda angry about him doing because I dropped a glass ornament and it had smashed. He bent down also and tried to help, grabbing my wrist and telling me not to touch the glass. His grip was scarily tight and forceful, and his hands were clammy and gross. I slipped my hand out of his grip and asked if I could help him with anything. That's when it got weird. He pulled out a leaflet from his back pocket and told me he was an artist and had a Christmas art show happening in the local church hall, and he wanted me to go with him. He told me that he was a painter and he thought I would like his work. I had never indicated that I was interested in art to him, or anyone else for that matter, which is why I thought it was strange. I asked him if he wanted me to pin the leaflet to the local event board, and he reached out and touched my arm and said, "No, the invitation is specifically for you." He pointed his finger and jabbed it into my breast and said, "You." So I'm standing there in a dark corner, obscured from view by artificial Christmas trees, just kind of cornered by this guy who was touching me. I cringed away and said that I was busy with my boyfriend that day and that I'm sorry, and kind of scampered off. I remember feeling really strange after that. The fact he grabbed my wrist and jabbed his finger into my chest that way. I told a few of my colleagues about it, and they all told me that they would warn me next time he was in the store so I could maybe hang out at the storeroom until he was gone. That memo must have missed a few of the temp Christmas staff because one day I got told by one, "Your friend is asking for you at the tills." It wasn't unusual for friends to stop by, as it was fairly popular for gifts and other things, so thinking it was maybe my ex's mum or something, I head to the till and there he is. He's holding a piece of paper. I cringe, but he had seen me now, so I walk over and ask what he needed from me. He passed the paper over and asked me to open it. Folded up was a drawing of me, with exaggerated breasts and cartoon-like eyes watering the hanging baskets in a very strange position. I kind of stood there and said thank you, but I couldn't keep it as I thought it was inappropriate to take gifts from customers. I handed it back to him and he kind of looked at me with this angry stare. He turned around and walked out without another word. By this point, I had had enough. I knocked on my manager's door and told him about the whole scenario that just happened and all the previous interactions I had with him over the past year. He watched the CCTV and agreed that it was so strange the way he gave me this gross picture, and he told me he would talk to him if he ever came back. He praised me for my reaction to his advances and said I was doing the right thing, and he would try and see him off next time. The next day was a Sunday and I was not due into work. My boss calls me and tells me he just received a call from HQ stating that an anonymous caller had called in to report a staff member inappropriately coming on to a customer. The staff member they had described named was me. The caller said that I had been inappropriate towards him at work, offered to do things with him, had led him on and obviously was promiscuous, and that I had been pursuing him for over a year. The jerk even described a fictitious relationship we had and ranted loudly about how I had been cheating on my boyfriend before hanging up. HQ luckily didn't believe a word as my manager had already mentioned the guy to one of his higher-ups, but they thought it was wise to let me know about this crazy guy and suggest I report it to the police. The next day I did just that. The officer I spoke to said that he matched the description of a man who was a local pest, somebody who often harasses young girls in the local area. He was also known to stalk girls in his car and had attempted to abduct a young girl 4 years ago. The police officers assured me that they would file the report and talk to him officially and that he was not allowed in the garden center or anywhere near me again, and if he did, I was to call the police and he would be arrested. Unfortunately, though, it never stopped him sending a ranting letter to my workplace address to me saying he would end himself if I didn't take him back and received his gift he drew of me. Fortunately, the police saw this as an unsolicited contact and he was thankfully arrested. At the time of the story, it was the summer after junior year and a couple of my buddies and I were at someone's house doing the usual things teenage guys do. After a couple of hours of Xbox and basketball, one of our friends, Sam, rolled up with a trunk full of fireworks, and we decided it would be fun to go set them off in an empty field a mile away from the house. As we all piled into Sam's car and started driving out of the neighborhood, a man stepped into the road and blocked our way. He was huge and covered in tattoos, probably 6'3" or so, with long dark hair pulled back into a ratty ponytail. Sam honked the horn as the man stood in front of our car yelling obscenities at us. Finally, my friend had had enough and whipped the car around him while flipping the guy the bird, speeding out of the neighborhood and towards the main road. A couple of minutes later, we got to the field and set up the fireworks. As we all hid around the edges of the grass, Sam stepped forward and lit the firework up. Seconds later, the firework ignited and exploded, much louder than any of us had expected. I panicked and ran back to Sam's car with him, and he slammed on the gas and flew out of the parking lot onto the main road. As we neared the entrance to my friend's neighborhood, it dawned on Sam that he had left the rest of the guys back at the field. So he stopped the car and made me get out so he could go retrieve the other guys. I didn't understand why I couldn't go with him, but it didn't matter. It was a nice summer night and I sat down on the sidewalk near the entrance of the neighborhood and pulled out my phone. After a couple of minutes of phone games, it died in my hands. Crap. I sat back and enjoyed the weather, waiting for the headlights to come back down the road when I heard a slight noise behind me. I turned my head, expecting to see a bird or wind-blown branches or something, but the streetlight outlined the figure of the man from earlier. He had crept up behind me while I was sitting there. He locked eyes with me and I was immediately struck by the wild look in them, like he was both looking at me and looking through me at the same time. I got up and backed away slowly, then turned and started walking away from him. He kept pace behind me and began to yell at me. "Hey you! Get back here!" I increased my pace and he continued to match it, screaming at me the entire time. Eventually, I was full out sprinting away from him and I heard him slow down. I tore down the sidewalk back to the parking lot of the field and reunited with my friends before relaying the story to them. As we drove back, we searched the area for him, but he was nowhere to be found. I have no idea what this weirdo wanted, and we never called the police to really get them involved, and we never saw him again, but it dawned on me that if my phone hadn't died, I probably wouldn't have noticed the footsteps of the man and probably wouldn't have had such a fortunate outcome. I was around 7 years old and very close to my uncle and aunt that lived a few towns over. We had a house phone and I was allowed to make calls to people that were on the address book. I would call them once a week just to know how they were and ask silly questions, like how was your day, how are your dogs, and when are you coming to visit? One day I accidentally pressed a wrong number while dialing and called someone else. A lady answered the phone and I started talking as if though I was talking to my aunt. I guess as a kid I didn't find much difference in the other woman's voice. I asked her how she was and she said she was okay, but asked what my name was because apparently my number appeared as unknown. I told her, "Tia, this is Samantha. I'm using Mom's phone." Her voice changed and she started talking to me like she knew me. Asked me questions about school, which I found odd because she knew I was homeschooled, which I corrected her and reminded her of how I was homeschooled. This went for around 3 days. Around the same time of day she would call. I would run to the phone and answer. We would talk for around half an hour. My mom would only allow me to make calls for less than 10 minutes to out of town because they were expensive, so I told my aunt to call back when she wanted to talk because we couldn't pay the calls. We got close, talking about her day, how she was a teacher. I told her about stuff I liked, and I never felt so close to her. Then one day she asked me for my address. She said she had forgotten where I lived and wanted to take a visit, and that was a big red flag for me, as my uncle and aunt knew exactly where I lived. I got a bit scared and hung up. I started overthinking about weird stuff that she had said to me, like if I had a boyfriend and what were my favorite places to visit, questions my aunt would never ask. Next time she called, I told her I knew she wasn't my Tia, and that we couldn't keep talking anymore, which she responded by saying, "You're too friendly. It's sad we can't be friends anymore, but I know where to find you. We will see each other soon," and hung up. I got scared. I went looking for my mom and told her I had called the wrong number, that I hoped she didn't ground me. She checked the number in the caller ID and then the address book. The phone number was different from my aunt's, from only one number. It was a private phone, so it didn't appear on the big regional phone book. She called back, but no one picked up. I never told my mom what happened, just that I called the wrong number once, which was true, but I never gave her the full story. I was at the gym, jogging on a treadmill. As always, I had my phone propped up against the dashboard and was watching an episode of a new show that had been quite popular recently. I got noise-canceling headphones on and am focusing on the show, so I don't notice the woman who gets onto the machine next to me. I don't know how long the woman was trying to get my attention, but suddenly I feel my headphones pulled from my ears. I almost fall off my treadmill and look around to see the woman next to me, bright red and angry. "I was calling you," she hissed at me. So I slow down my machine, my heart still racing, and I ask what she needed, trying to be as polite as I can and ignoring her initial rudeness. I feel pretty embarrassed that I hadn't realized she was calling me. She huffs and then points at my phone, saying, "Turn that off, it's distracting." I try to calm the situation by telling her that I will turn the phone's brightness down, but she insists I turn it off. I ask her why, and she responds with, "I haven't seen that episode. You're spoiling it for me." And she tries to lunge forward to grab my phone. I quickly put my arm out between her and my phone. The motion startles her and causes her to stumble and fall off her own machine. She screams that I pushed her off, but everyone had witnessed her harassing me. When she realizes that no one is paying attention, She got up, grabbed her things, and walked out. I wish I could give more satisfying ending, but I'm not one for confrontation. This happened when I was about 12 or 13, female. I wasn't developed by any means. You could tell that I looked like a child. It was my younger brother's birthday, and as we waited for our table at a restaurant, we decided to go to Barnes & Noble's across the street. My siblings, parents, and I were walking around the tables with new released books. I had went to the bathroom by myself before going to the tables, which is very important to note. We were chilling at the tables, making jokes and whatnot for about 5 minutes. That's when I noticed a man, probably in his late 20s, in a red shirt. He was on the opposite side of the table, phone in his hand near his chest, and he was looking down at the books. I'd be jumping to random tables looking through books with my mom and siblings there. I started noticing that he'd have his phone angled so he could take pictures of me without having to use the actual buttons. That, along with him following me from table to table, creeped me out. I looked around and saw no one else notice that he was doing that. In the moment, I kept thinking about how he could literally kidnap me because of how much smaller and weaker I was compared to him. I thought about how lucky I was to have gone to the bathroom before seeing this nasty man at the tables. Once I noticed he was doing that, I started moving closer to my mom and staying across from or right next to her. I was so creeped out by this man who was taking pictures of an underage girl. I didn't want to tell my mom or anyone really because I didn't want to ruin my brother's birthday dinner by making everyone paranoid or simply not want to be there anymore. After staying in the bookstore for about 30 minutes, my mom and older sister were saying it was time to go. As far as the bookstore goes, the genre book sections were tall bookcases, so as we were walking out, I started looking to either side of me to see if the guy was still there. Guess what? He was keeping pace on the other side of the bookcase aisles with his phone pointed at me, straight up, blatantly taking pictures of me. I started speed walking, practically jogging because I was so freaked out. On the real, my heart was beating so fast and my hands were sweating buckets. He followed us out to the parking lot, and when I turned back to see where he went, he was gone. My family to this day doesn't know that this incident occurred. This happened about 5 years ago. I am a female, and at the time I was 21. I was visiting my old hometown, and me and some old school friends decided to go to a local club. For some reason, I can't remember why, I left earlier than others and decided to walk home since it was only a couple of kilometers and taxis are expensive. It was winter and very quiet, no one to be seen anywhere. I walked very fast because it was cold and I wanted to get home quickly. Then I saw a man walking in an opposite direction, but at first thought nothing of it and assumed he was just some person going home from a bar or party like me. He greeted me, but I didn't know him and just kept on walking without answering. To my horror, he turned around and started following me, and I dialed the emergency number to my phone and put it in the pocket so I could make a secret call if he did anything sketchy. He ran up at me and started asking me questions like why I was walking alone, what my name was, did I live here, etc. I didn't really answer to anything and told him I didn't need company. He was starting to really creep me out, and then he told me he was going to walk me home so that nobody does anything to me. I wanted to scream at him that you are the only person here who can do anything. I don't know if he actually had some superhero complex and really just wanted to save damsels in distress, but I wasn't in distress until he came along, and he was drunk and, if you don't mind me saying, he looked a bit crazy. Then he proceeded to grab my hand like we were some romantically involved couple. I didn't dare to resist, and my home was very close, so I didn't want to anger him. When I saw my house, I told him that I was fine now and he could let me go. He asked if I was home alone, and I told him that my sister and her boyfriend were there. That seemed to put him off, and he hugged me, told me goodbye, and left. I almost ran inside. I never saw him again, but later a friend of mine who lived close to my home told me of a similar experience. Maybe a year after that, my mom told me that she had been walking home late at night and some creep had followed her too, saying the exact same things about making sure nothing happens as he said to me. This guy definitely had some type of superhero complex. My cat has been missing for 2 weeks now. I raised him by hand. He's a little mama's boy and he never leaves my side for more than an hour. So when I noticed he didn't come to bed that first night, I immediately knew something was wrong. For what I'm about to tell you to make sense, you need to understand that I love this cat so much. I have a tattoo of him on my chest next to my heart. He saved my life when I was in a bad mental place, and I would do anything to find him. So keep that in mind as you read this. When I realized he was missing, I posted his photo on every missing animals page I could find. I printed flyers, I went to the SPCA and every vet in my town to look for him. I didn't find him. Last night, someone told me that it was mating season for cats now. I live on the bottom side of the planet, so it's springtime now and it's sweltering, and that intact males will often chase neutered males, like my kimchi, off their territory. They suggested I go door to door in my neighborhood and ask people if I can look under their sheds and in their crawl spaces, as cats who are attacked tend to go into hiding. I rose bright and early this morning and set out on my cat hunt. I dragged my very patient boyfriend, Benjamin, along to protect me from any creeps. I printed out another batch of flyers to take with, in case I had to prove the legitimacy of my operation. Very few people actually let us onto their property. There were a few kind old ladies who took some flyers that they offered to distribute at Bible study. One lady even offered us an ice-cold glass of water, but most neighbors just squinted cautiously at our sweaty hands and foreheads as we tried desperately to persuade them of our innocence. At least take a flyer. Sir, please. By noon, we still haven't seen any trace of him. We sat down on the sidewalk under a tree. It was like the sun was screaming at us along with the cicadas. I looked down at my legs and saw little beads of sweat trickle through the red dust that had by now collected in a thick layer on my calves. "Kiddo, hey girlie, what you sitting there looking so droopy for?" A middle-aged man sporting a mullet, beer belly, and some Crocs sandals was waving at me from his open garage. His house looked like it was probably very snazzy back in the 70s, but then again, this whole neighborhood looks kind of like that. He seemed nice, though, even though he wasn't wearing a shirt. I explained my situation. "Lost cat. I see. I'll look up in my roof again. Them kits like to crawl up there and make a ruckus." He studied the flyer carefully, taking out a pair of reading glasses from the back pocket of his jean shorts. "I've seen this cat of yours. He's a darling. I've seen the others around here beat him up bad, though, screaming and hollering, chasing him into the yard across from here." I looked where he pointed. I would have never noticed if he hadn't pointed it out. You couldn't really see the house for all the shrubbery. In front it all was a whitewashed wall with a rusted gate. It was clear someone tried to burglar-proof the gate with some planks at some time. It was now hanging by its last hinge. I thanked the nice mullet man for the intel and watched him enter his home, closing his door and blinds behind him. My boyfriend and I approached the house across the street. The sidewalk was burst open from years of neglect, giving way to a forest of prickly weeds. I looked for a doorbell or a mailbox, but there was none. I peeked beyond the rusty gate. The yard was barren except for the tall weeds. Everywhere there were piles of rubble, bricks, and planks, perhaps a renovation project that was never completed. The wooden part of the front door was nailed and bolted, but the glass panels were mostly all missing. A scared cat could slip in there easily. I stepped into the yard. To my left I saw an old metal shed, rusted completely. The top was covered by green plastic shade netting. A makeshift door made of plywood stood open, revealing the inside of the shed. The netting above made the inside glow dark green. Babe, this is trespassing," Benjamin called hesitantly, still standing in the street. "Maybe we should just leave a flyer." I ignored him. This place is clearly abandoned. Trespassing is the least of the crimes I would commit to find my cat. Movement from inside the shed caught my eye. "Kimchi? Here, kitty kitty. Here, boy," I called. The creature scurried away. It was a rat. A few more darted into the shadows. "Oh, God," I exclaimed, suddenly feeling itchy all over. I hope he hasn't eaten any of those rats. I'm not going any closer to the shed. I called his name a few more times, but to no avail. I tried looking into the house, but newspaper and black bags covered the windows. I would have to find a way around. I finally persuaded my boyfriend to join me in my crime. To be honest, I was getting pretty freaked out and I needed to hold his hand. We walked around the right side of the house, waving mosquitoes, flies, and gnats out of the way. When we got to the back of the house, the smell of feces hit me like a frying pan in the face. I couldn't see the source of the smell, though. What I did see were piles and piles of junk. Old furniture, rubble, boxes, black bags, everywhere. In the middle was an empty swimming pool. The sides were cracked with grass and weeds growing out, and at the bottom was a puddle of horrible brown sludge, almost obscured completely by gnats and flies. I called desperately to my cat. I had hoped he would be hiding here, but the more I see of this place, the more I hope he isn't here. The smell of feces was so strong. I walked further into the property, calling out to him. I came round a corner. In front of me I could see the windows, but these ones weren't boarded up, and they were open. But as I came closer, I realized that if he was indeed in the house, I wouldn't be able to get to him. The inside of the house was shacked almost to the ceiling, full of the same kind of junk that was all over the backyard. This was the type of thing I thought I'd only ever see on TLC. I could see more rats running around inside. Then the smell hit us again. "Jesus, this is an absolute dump," I said to Benjamin, covering my mouth. That's when I turned around and saw him. An old man sitting on a plastic lawn chair in the shadow of the house. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, sir. I was just looking for my cat. We'll leave right now," I exclaimed, panicking and incredibly embarrassed. He had scared the crap out of me. He said nothing. He only studied us with his eyes. He was old, but not ancient, and skinny, the sickly kind of skinny with gaunt cheeks and deep eye sockets. He was wearing a neat outfit, polo shirt tucked into some pressed pants, but despite this, I had a suspicion that he had been wearing the same pair of clothes for a very long time, as it was covered in stains. I approached him cautiously with a flyer. "Have you seen my cat?" He stared at it for at least 5 seconds, then slowly stretched out an arm and took the paper from me, studying it further. I stood there awkwardly waiting for a reply, but he said nothing. Instead, he lowered his head, pressing the page onto his forehead as if to wipe the sweat from his brow, but he kept it there, crumpled it up against his face. And then he started to growl, like a dog. He was growling at me. I didn't know what to do, so I just started apologizing profusely for disturbing him. For some reason, I tried to take the offending flyer back from him, as if I was afraid he might harm the image of my cat. I wanted to rip it out of his hands. I was so freaked out and scared at this point, I don't really remember why I wanted to do that or how close I was to this man. But Benjamin grabbed me by the arm and, half running, pulled me to the front of the house, then ushered me into the street. When we were safely under the tree on the mullet man's side of the street, he swung me around and looked deep into my eyes as if checking I still had all my marbles. We walked home in silence. I hope my cat comes home or someone finds him and calls. Before this afternoon, I was afraid that my cat was hit by a car or something. Now I'm afraid that he might be hiding in that house with that man, and feces, and the rats. I'm freaking out even more now than I was before. This was years ago when I was 19 years old and working at a phone store. I was closing up for the night alone when a man walked in before I could lock up. He then turned around, locked the door himself, and switched the sign to closed. I knew right then and there that I was being robbed. He looks at me with a hand in his jacket and says, "I want a phone, and I don't want to pay." I give this dude the biggest grin and say, "Whatever you want, boss." And I immediately walk to get him the newest iPhone, because he came off as an iPhone guy to me. Though I do remember being really annoyed that he dragged in a bunch of mud and water throughout the store. The dude was soaking wet because it was raining off and on all day. I was livid that I'd have to mop the floors again. You think of strange things in these situations. He then starts talking about how he has a gun, which was unneeded, I got the hint already, and also starts talking about how he wants the phone hooked up with service. I found this to be an extremely odd request coming from the guy robbing me. I mean, you think he'd just tell me to give him all the money and phones in the store, but then I realize why he made this request. He starts screaming at the alarm on the wall, and I mean screaming. I realize immediately that this man was on something and I might just die in the store tonight. I get this man an account, hook everything up. I just wanted to give him what he wanted and get him out of my store. As I'm doing this, he's walking around curiously and grabs a ball, crumples a paper over it, unlocks the door and buries it. He then comes back inside and says, "Don't worry, it'll grow into something much better." I could see all of it because the entire front of the store was glass. I just gave him a weak chuckle and went with it, and then someone else pulls up to the store. It was my mom. She was picking me up because that very morning I had gotten into an accident and totaled my car, so she was going to drive me back to my place until I got my rental. After a little bit, she called the police because she knew something was wrong and correctly assumed I was being robbed. By the way, this whole process took forever. My life was on the line and I can't hook up phones any faster than I'd like to, so please stop yelling at me that I'm being slow. I can't do anything about it. Finally, I got his phone hooked up. He walked out the store and let his dog out of the car and started driving crazy around the parking lot until the cops showed up. And I even bought a lottery ticket on the way home that day. I was convinced that I used all my bad luck for the year in one day. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear it featured here on the channel. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt.com. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.